What if the person sleeping next to you was just a staged illusion? At 8 p.m. on Friday, Derek entered his soundproof pod, but his secret phone buzzed in his jacket. It was Elara, my cousin who shares my rare biometrics. Her text read, "Copied. They were stealing my life, but they forgot my job is destroying criminals who think they are smarter than the law. Pour a drink and watch how I buried their greed." My name is Kennedy Vallon, in the high-stakes world of reputation management and digital security. That name is not just a label, it is a fortress. At 34 years old, I am the sole heiress to a biometric data empire that secures the identities of half the Fortune 500 companies. And I am the founder of Vanguard Crisis Solutions. My job is simple yet brutal. I clean up the messes that wealthy, powerful people make when they think no one is watching. I erase digital footprints, I negotiate silence, and I bury scandals before they can breathe the morning air. I have spent my entire adult life believing that I am the one person who cannot be deceived because I am the one who writes the scripts for deception. I was wrong. It was a Friday evening in Seattle, the kind where the rain does not fall so much as it hangs suspended in the gray air, wrapping the city in a cold, damp embrace. From the living room of our penthouse, the city was just a smear of lights through the floor-to-ceiling glass. This apartment was supposed to be my sanctuary. It was a masterpiece of modern architecture and paranoia. Perched 40 stories above the street, every door unlocked with a fingerprint scan. The lights, the temperature, the very transparency of the window glass were controlled by a central AI system that responded only to my voice or Derek's. It was the safest place in the world, or so I told myself as I stood by the kitchen island, swirling a glass of Pinot Noir that probably cost more than most people's monthly mortgage. Derek was standing by the window, adjusting the cuffs of his shirt. Derek Sterling, my husband, even after 7 years. Looking at him gave me a sense of profound, anchoring calm. At 38 years old, he possessed the kind of effortless, symmetrical beauty that usually signals a lack of substance. But Derek was different. He was the chief financial officer of a mid-sized logistics firm, a job that was respectable but nowhere near the stratosphere of wealth I inhabited. That was why I loved him. He was modest. He was grounded. He drove a Volvo when he could have driven a Ferrari. He smiled with his eyes. He was the only thing in my life that felt organic, untainted by the transactional nature of my business. We had just finished a light dinner. The remnants of our meal, grilled sea bass and asparagus, sat on the marble counter, waiting for the housekeeping staff who would arrive at 8 o'clock the next morning. The silence in the apartment was heavy, but it usually felt like a comfortable heaviness, the kind that comes from total security. I have to hop on that call with the Singapore team. Derek said, turning from the window. His voice was apologetic, coated in that warm, rich timbre that had charmed my father before he passed away. I know it is Friday, Kennedy, and I hate to do this, but the merger is in a delicate phase. They are 12 hours ahead. It is already Saturday morning for them. I smiled, masking a flicker of disappointment. Go, I said. I have some case files to review anyway. A senator's son got into some trouble in Vegas, and I need to structure the denial strategy before Monday. Derek walked over and kissed my forehead. His lips were dry and warm. He smelled of cedarwood and the crisp, clean scent of starch. It was the smell of reliability. I will use the pod, he said, gesturing toward the structure that dominated the far corner of our massive living room. The soundproof pod was a recent addition. It was a sleek, matte black cube, roughly 6 feet by 6 feet, designed for high-end acoustic isolation. Derek had insisted on installing it 2 months ago, claiming that his new project involved highly sensitive financial data that required absolute confidentiality, even from me. He called it compliance. I called it an eyesore, but I respected his dedication. In my line of work, I understood the value of a closed door. I watched him walk toward the black cube. He paused, patting his pockets, then shrugged. He was carrying his laptop and a stack of files. I noticed he had left his personal phone on the kitchen island, right next to the fruit bowl. That was a classic Derek move, a subtle, Unconscious signal of transparency. Look, I am leaving my connection to the world right here in front of you. However, he had a second phone. It was a sleek, nondescript black device that he referred to as the corporate vault. He had explained it to me a dozen times. It was issued by his company solely for encrypted communication regarding the merger. He told me it had a GPS tracker that alerted his compliance department if it ever left his person during work hours. He told me the data on it was worth millions. He told me I was never, ever to touch it. Not because he had secrets, but because a single unauthorized fingerprint could trigger a remote wipe and cost his firm a fortune. I respected that. I respected boundaries. I will see you in an hour, he said. The heavy door of the pod slid shut with a pneumatic hiss. Then, I heard the mechanical thud of the magnetic locks engaging. A small red light above the doorframe turned on, illuminating the words, "In meeting." I was alone. I sighed and turned back to the living room. The emptiness of the penthouse suddenly felt vast. I decided to tidy up the lounge area before pouring myself another glass of wine. The B Italia sofa, a sprawling expanse of gray velvet, was slightly rumpled where Derek had been sitting earlier, reading the Wall Street Journal. I moved to fluff the pillows, my movements automatic. That was when I saw it. It was his suit jacket. He must have taken it off when he got home and tossed it over the armrest of the sofa. Forgetting to grab it before heading into the pod, it was a navy blue blazer, tailored perfectly to his frame. As I reached out to pick it up and hang it in the closet, I felt a vibration against my palm. It was a sharp, insistent buzz coming from the inside pocket. I froze. Derek's personal phone was on the kitchen island. I could see it from where I stood. That meant the phone buzzing in his jacket pocket was the corporate vault, the one that was never supposed to leave his side, the one that contained data worth millions. My first instinct was concern. If the compliance department was calling because he had separated himself from the device, he might be in trouble. I held the jacket up, hesitating. The buzzing stopped, then started again. 2 short bursts, a text message. Curiosity is an occupational hazard for me. I spend my days dissecting the secrets of strangers. It was impossible to turn that part of my brain off, even when it came to the man I trusted most in the world. I reached into the pocket. The fabric was cool and smooth silk. My fingers closed around the cold metal of the phone. I pulled it out. The screen was dark. But as I tilted it, the motion sensor activated. The lock screen lit up. It was a default background, a generic blue abstract wave, but it was the notification in the center of the screen that made the blood drain from my face, leaving me cold and hollow. New message. The sender's name was not a bank. It was not a compliance officer. It was not a client in Singapore. The name glowing on the screen was Elara, Elara Vance, my cousin. My hand did not shake. I did not gasp. My reaction to shock is never dramatic. It is clinical. I go still. My heart rate slows down as my brain diverts all energy to processing the new data. Elara was my distant cousin, a girl of 24 whom I had practically raised after her parents died in a car accident 10 years ago. She was the family charity case, though I never allowed anyone to call her that. I had paid for her college tuition. I had bought her first car. When she graduated with a degree in business administration but no prospects, I was the one who suggested Derek hire her as his executive assistant. I thought it would be good for her to have a mentor. I thought she was safe. She was timid, mouse-like, always looking at me with wide, grateful eyes that seemed to say, "Thank you for letting me exist in your orbit." Why was my husband's assistant texting his top-secret, encrypted work phone at 8 o'clock on a Friday night? The preview of the message was visible. It was short. Just 3 distinct phrases that shattered the reality I had been living in for 7 years. Copied. Does she suspect anything? I stared at the words. The white text on the black background seemed to burn into my retinas. Copied. Does she suspect anything? The implication was not merely infidelity. If they were sleeping together, the message would be about affection, or lust, or logistics of a meeting. But copied implied data. Does she suspect anything implied a victim? And I was the only she in this equation. I looked up from the phone, my gaze locking onto the black cube in the corner of the room. The red light was still on. In meeting, Derek was in there. He had lied about the phone. He had lied about it needing to be on his person. If he lied about that, what else was a lie? And Elara, my little Elara, with her thrift store cardigans and her constant apologies, she was the only other person in my extended family who shared my specific blood type and a genetic marker rarity that appeared in only 1 out of every 10,000 people. It was a trivial biological fact, something we had joked about at family gatherings. But in my world, biology is not trivial. Biology is a key. My company, Valin Biometrics, uses genetic sequencing as the ultimate authentication factor for our highest-tier vaults. A cold, hard knot formed in my stomach. I carefully slid the phone back into the jacket pocket, placing it exactly as it had been. I fluffed the pillow slightly to mimic the way it had looked before. I needed to act normal. I needed to verify. I walked toward the pod. My footsteps were silent on the plush rug, but they felt like thunder in my ears. I approached the black metal door. It was locked. Of course, the magnetic seal was airtight. I raised my hand to knock, to demand an explanation, to scream, but I stopped. Kennedy Valin does not scream. Kennedy Valin investigates. I pressed my ear against the cold, matte surface of the pod. It was soundproof. Yes, rated for high decibel isolation, but no consumer-grade pod is truly silent if you know how to listen. And I knew this pod. I had paid $40,000 for it. I knew that the ventilation intake on the left side was a weak point in the acoustic seal. I moved to the side, leaning down near the vent. I could hear a voice inside. It was Derek. He was speaking. I held my breath, straining to make out the words. Quarterly projections are down by 12%, but we anticipate a rebound in the third quarter, provided the asset allocation remains stable. It was Derek's voice. He was talking about numbers. He sounded professional, firm, exactly like a CFO conducting a high-level meeting. I frowned. Was I crazy? Was the text message a misunderstanding, maybe copied referred to a file for work? Maybe, does she suspect anything referred to a surprise party or a gift? I listened closer. Quarterly projections are down by 12%, but we anticipate a rebound in the third quarter, provided the asset allocation remains stable. My eyes widened. The sentence. He had said the exact same sentence again, not just the same words, the same intonation, the same pause between quarter and provided, the exact same pitch on the word stable. Human beings do not loop. We vary our breathing. We change our cadence. Even when repeating a point for emphasis, we change the stress. But this was identical. It was a recording. I listened for another 10 seconds. Quarterly projections are down by 12%. He was not in a meeting. He was not even talking. He was playing a loop of himself talking to create an acoustic alibi. Panic, cold and sharp, tried to rise in my throat, but I swallowed it down. If he was playing a recording inside the pod, then what was he doing? Was he just sitting in there, staring at the wall? Or was he not in there at all? I stepped back from the pod, looking at the monolithic black box. It looked less like a workspace now, and more like a coffin, or a magician's box, the kind used for disappearing acts. I looked around the apartment. The windows were sealed. The front door log would show if anyone had left. I was the administrator. I knew everything that happened in this house, or I thought I did. I walked back to the kitchen island, my movements stiff and mechanical. I looked at Derek's personal phone, still sitting innocently by the fruit bowl. Then I looked at the jacket on the sofa where the second phone, the real phone, was hidden. Copied. Elara was the only one who could match my biometrics. Derek was the insider who knew my security protocols. And I was the fool standing in a 2,000-square-foot glass cage, thinking I was the queen of the castle while the rats were gnawing at the foundation. Something was wrong with the air in the room. It felt thin, recycled, insufficient. The luxury that surrounded me, the Italian leather, the imported marble, The abstract art that cost more than Elara's entire education suddenly felt like a stage set. A very expensive, very detailed set designed to keep the audience looking at the pretty lights while the actors moved the props in the dark. I needed to see inside that pod, but I could not force the door open without triggering an alarm that Derek would hear, or worse, alerting him that I knew. And if he was not in there, if the pod was empty, then where was he? And how did he get out of a penthouse that was sealed tighter than a bank vault? My intuition, honed by 15 years of hunting corporate spies and blackmailers, began to scream at me. This was not an affair. Men do not build soundproof pods and clone phones just to sleep with the secretary. This was an operation. I gripped the edge of the marble counter, the stone cool against my fingertips. I took a deep breath, forcing my heart rate to align with the rhythm of my thoughts. They thought I was the victim. They thought I was the unsuspecting wife, the mark, the woman who would cry and ask why. They had no idea. They had forgotten that before I was a wife, before I was a philanthropist, I was a cleaner. And when I find a stain, I do not just wipe it up, I remove the surface it sits on. I looked at the black pod one last time. Play your tape. Derek, I thought, my mind sharpening into a weapon. Enjoy your meeting. I turned away and walked toward the hidden control panel behind the wet bar. It was time to stop being the wife and start being the CEO. If they wanted to play games with my reality, I was going to show them exactly how fragile their version of the truth really was. I did not bang on the pod door. I did not scream. Amateurs react. Professionals analyze. I walked back to the living room sofa, my steps measured and silent on the plush carpet. The ambient noise of the city outside felt distant, muted by the triple-paned glass, a stark contrast to the storm brewing inside my mind. I sat down, picked up my tablet from the coffee table, and unlocked it with a thumbprint. The screen glowed with the familiar dashboard of my home automation system. To Derek, this was just an app that controlled the lights and the thermostat. To me, it was the nervous system of the penthouse, and I was the brain. I accessed the network diagnostics panel. If Derek was truly on a video conference with Singapore, the data throughput from the pod should have been significant. High-definition video and encrypted audio require substantial bandwidth. I isolated the IP address assigned to the pod's internal router. The graph was flat. 0 upload, 0 download. A cold chill, sharper than the air conditioning, traced its way down my spine. There was no call. There was no connection to Singapore. The pod was a digital dead zone. The only activity was a localized power draw from the internal outlets, consistent with basic appliances, not a high-speed data stream. I closed the network tab and opened a hidden folder labeled System Maintenance. Inside was the control interface for the redundant security layer, the one Derek did not know existed. When we moved in, I had installed pinhole cameras in key areas, not out of distrust for him, but out of habit. In my line of work, you learn that blind spots are where you die. I had never checked them. I never felt the need to. Until tonight, I selected the feed labeled Pod Interior. The image flickered onto the screen in high-contrast monochrome infrared. My breath hitched in my throat. The pod was empty. The ergonomic leather chair was pushed back from the desk. The laptop was open, but the screen was dark. On the desk, a portable high-fidelity speaker system was pulsing rhythmically, the source of the looped voice recording I had heard from the outside. Quarterly projections. Asset allocation. It was a ghost machine, performing for an audience of one. I zoomed in on the speaker. It was wired to a small digital recorder. Simple, crude, effective. A decoy designed to buy time. So, where was he? I switched to the external camera feeds. The front door logs showed no exit. The elevator cameras showed no activity for the last 3 hours. The balcony doors were sealed. A man cannot simply vanish from a 40-story fortress unless he never planned to leave through the front door. I pulled up the building schematics. There was only one other way out, the maintenance service hatch located in the utility closet behind the kitchen. It connected to a dedicated service elevator used by HVAC technicians and emergency crews. It required a physical key and a code that changed monthly. I walked to the utility closet and opened it. The dust on the floor was disturbed. The heavy steel hatch, usually painted shut with layers of industrial gloss, showed fresh scratches around the lock mechanism. I touched the keypad. It was warm. He had bypassed the digital log by using the manual override. Clever. He had done his homework. I returned to the sofa, my mind racing. He was gone, physically absent from the building while his digital ghost played executive in the living room. I checked the garage feeds. His Volvo was still parked in its designated spot, gleaming under the fluorescent lights. He knew I might check the car. He knew I might check the odometer. But he had to move. He had to get somewhere. I minimized the house controls and opened the Ghost Protocol application. This was custom software developed by my team at Vanguard, designed for tracking high-value targets who did not want to be found. It did not rely on standard GPS alone. It triangulated signal pings, Wi-Fi handshakes, and Bluetooth identifiers. I typed in a name, Elara Vance. I had given Elara a car when she started working for Derek, a white Audi A4. It was a generous gift, or so she thought. In reality, the onboard computer was synced to my personal cloud server for diagnostic purposes. The map of Seattle loaded. A grid of dark streets and glowing nodes. A single blue dot was moving rapidly south on Interstate 5. She was driving, and judging by the speed, 80 miles an hour in a 65 zone, she was in a hurry. I watched the dot. It was heading toward the affluent suburbs of Bellevue. My eyes narrowed as I anticipated the route. She took the exit for Medina, then a left on Evergreen Point Road, then a right onto a secluded private drive. My heart stopped for a second, then hammered against my ribs with painful intensity. The blue dot came to a rest at 8820 Willow Creek Lane. I knew that address. I owned it. It was a property I had purchased 5 years ago under a shell corporation. It was a modern, bunker-like structure built into a hillside, designed as a safe house for my most vulnerable clients, whistleblowers, politicians in hiding, victims of high-level stalking. It was off the grid. It was invisible to public records, and it was where I kept the physical backups of my most sensitive data, the Valen Legacy Archives, the hard drives containing the genetic keys and encryption protocols for my entire empire. Only 3 people knew that house existed: me, my lawyer, and Derek. I had taken him there once, 2 years ago, during a wildfire scare when we had to evacuate the city. I had trusted him with the code to the front gate. I had trusted him with the location of my sanctuary. Now, he was there with her. I imagined them walking through the front door. I imagined Derek punching in the code I had taught him, leading Elara into the reinforced server room in the basement. They were not just having a tryst. They were raiding the vault. The message on the phone made perfect sense now. Copied. They were not copying files remotely. They were physically copying the master drives. They were stealing the source code. Rage, hot and blinding, threatened to overwhelm me. I wanted to call the police. I wanted to drive there and burn the house down with them inside. I wanted to destroy them. But Kennedy Valen does not act on rage. Rage is messy. Rage leaves fingerprints. I forced myself to breathe. In, out. I watched the blue dot on the screen. Stationary now. They felt safe. They thought they had outsmarted me. They thought I was sipping wine in my penthouse, listening to a recording of a boring meeting, oblivious to the fact that they were dismantling my life piece by piece. I looked at the clock. It had been 40 minutes since Derek entered the pod. The recording was likely an hour long. He would need to be back soon to maintain the illusion. If I confronted them now, I would win a battle but lose the war. I would catch them in the act. Yes, there would be a scene. There would be tears. Derek would claim it was a one-time mistake. Elara would play the victim. They would lawyer up. The data they had already stolen might disappear into the cloud before I could retrieve it. No, I needed more. I needed to know the full scope of the plan. I needed to know who else was involved. I needed to know where the money was going. I needed to let them think they had won. I picked up the black phone, the corporate vault, from the sofa cushion where I had left it. I wiped the screen with the hem of my blouse, removing any trace of my fingerprints. I slid it back into the inner pocket of Derek's jacket, positioning it at the exact angle I had found it. I smoothed the fabric. I walked over to the pod and stood in front of it for a moment, staring at the red and meeting light. It was a mockery, a blinking red eye laughing at my stupidity. I returned to the sofa and picked up my wine glass. The liquid was still there, dark and rich. I took a sip. It tasted like ash. I opened my tablet again and pulled up the security feed for the safe house on Willow Creek Lane. The cameras there were not connected to the main grid. They were hardwired to a separate server. I watched as the feed loaded. The living room of the safe house was dark, illuminated only by the flashlights moving around. I saw two figures. One was tall, broad-shouldered. Derek. The other was smaller, slender. Elara. They were moving quickly, carrying metallic cases from the basement stairs. They were not just copying data, they were taking the physical drives. I took a screenshot, evidence. Then I closed the feed. I sat back, arranging my features into a mask of boredom and mild fatigue. I adjusted the lighting in the room to a soft, evening dim. I picked up a book, a biography of Catherine the Great, and opened it to a random page. I would wait. I would let him come back. I would let him sneak in through the service hatch, sweaty and triumphant. I would let him emerge from the pod, feigning exhaustion from a long call with Singapore. I would let him kiss me goodnight with lips that had just kissed my cousin. I would smile. I would ask him how the meeting went, and then, tomorrow, I would begin the process of destroying them, not quickly, not mercifully, but thoroughly. I would strip them of every asset, every hope, every shred of dignity until they were nothing more than cautionary tales in a business school textbook. The elevator chimed softly in the distance, but I knew it was not him. He would come from the kitchen. I waited. The silence of the apartment was no longer empty. It was filled with the sound of a trap snapping shut, and they were the ones who had walked right into it. The pneumatic hiss of the soundproof pod decompressing sounded like a dying breath in the silence of our living room. It was 9:15 at night. I watched from the edge of the sofa, a book resting forgotten in my lap, as the heavy black door swung open. Derek stepped out. His performance was worthy of an Academy Award. He rolled his shoulders forward, loosening the knot of his silk tie with a weary sigh. He rubbed his temples with his fingertips, grimacing slightly as if nursing a migraine induced by complex international negotiations. He looked exactly like a dedicated husband who had just spent an hour and a half battling over basis points with difficult stakeholders in Singapore. "I am exhausted," he murmured, walking toward me. His eyes were soft, seeking sympathy. "The market volatility is killing us. Kennedy." I barely managed to keep the merger on track. I stood up to meet him. My movements were fluid, practiced. I reached out and placed my hands on his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart through his shirt. It was a calm heart. It was not the racing heart of a man who had just stolen his wife's most guarded secrets. It was the heart of a sociopath. "You work too hard," I said, my voice gentle. He leaned in to kiss me. It was a chaste, lingering kiss on the cheek, the kind that signals intimacy and comfort. But as he pulled away, the air between us shifted. It was faint, almost imperceptible beneath the scent of his cedarwood cologne and the starch of his shirt. But I have a nose trained to detect anomalies. It was a sweet, cloying note, warm sugar and heavy musk, vanilla noir. It was not a common fragrance. It was a niche, artisanal scent that cost $300 a bottle. I knew exactly what it smelled like because I had bought a bottle of it for Elara last Christmas. She had gushed over it, calling it her signature scent. She wore it everywhere, and now, my husband smelled like her signature. He had not just been with her at the safe house. He had been close enough for the oils of her perfume to transfer onto his skin or his clothes. I did not recoil. I did not flinch. I smiled. A tight, sympathetic smile. "Go shower," I said. "You smell like stress." He laughed, a low, easy sound that used to make me feel safe. "You are the best. Kennedy, I do not know what I would do without you. You are about to find out," I thought as I watched him walk toward the master bathroom. The next morning, Saturday. I told Derek I had a crisis at the office. A client's server had been breached. I lied. He was too absorbed in his eggs Benedict eating with the appetite of a man who thinks he has gotten away with the perfect crime to ask for details. I drove to the Vanguard Crisis Solutions headquarters in downtown Seattle. The building was a glass needle piercing the gray sky, a monument to transparency in an opaque world. The offices were empty on the weekend, save for the security detail who nodded respectfully as I passed. I walked into my corner office, the door sealing shut behind me with a reassuring click. Here, I was not a wife, I was a hunter. I sat at my desk, a sprawling expanse of black obsidian, and logged into my private terminal. I did not need a warrant to investigate my own husband. I had his social security number, his mother's maiden name, and access to the dark web monitoring tools my company used to vet potential threats. I started with the money. Derek had always presented himself as financially conservative. He drove a Volvo. He invested in index funds. He spoke about compound interest with the reverence of a monk. But as I peeled back the layers of his digital financial footprint, that image dissolved like sugar in hot water. I bypassed his primary bank accounts, the ones he let me see, and ran a deep search on his credit identity. The system flagged multiple hits in offshore jurisdictions: Cayman Islands, Malta, Cyprus. I traced the shell companies. They all led back to a single, terrifying reality. Derek was not just a modest CFO. He was a degenerate gambler. The numbers on my screen were staggering. Over the last 3 years, he had leveraged himself into oblivion. He had bet against the market. He had poured money into high-risk cryptocurrency futures that had crashed and burned. He had borrowed from lenders who did not use collection agencies. They used baseball bats. The total debt was not $5 million. It was not $10 million. It was $50 million. He was drowning. He was a dead man walking, unless, of course, he could get his hands on a fortune large enough to wipe the slate clean and disappear. I sat back, the leather of my chair creaking. $50 million. That was the price of our marriage. That was the price of 7 years of memories. But why Elara? I opened a new window and began to investigate my cousin, Elara Vance, 24 years old, orphaned, grateful, timid. Or so I thought. Her digital history told a different story. I accessed the logs of her company laptop, the one I had purchased for her. I searched for keywords that had nothing to do with her job as an executive assistant: biomimicry, DNA synthesis, inheritance law, Washington state, non-extradition countries, and then I found the purchases. 6 months ago, she had bought a high-end DNA collection kit online, not the ancestry kind, the forensic kind. My mind flashed back to a Sunday afternoon last autumn. We were on the terrace. Elara had been brushing my hair. "Your hair is so silky." "Kennedy," she had said, "let me braid it for you. You look so tired." I had closed my eyes, enjoying the sensation of her fingers in my hair. I had felt a sharp tug, a pinch. "Oops, sorry, just a tangle." She had giggled. She had not been braiding my hair. She had been harvesting follicles. I remembered another time. We were having lunch. She had accidentally knocked my water glass over, then insisted on cleaning it up herself, carefully wrapping the glass in a napkin before taking it to the kitchen. Saliva samples. She had been collecting me, piece by piece, but why my bank accounts were secured with standard encryption? Derek could have tried to hack those without her. Why did they need her specifically? Then the realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. The Valen Legacy Trust. My father had created it before he died. It was not just money, it was the vault that held the bearer bonds, the deeds to our international properties, and most importantly, the intellectual property rights to the core biometric algorithms that Vanguard sold to governments. It was a black box of wealth worth nearly $500 million. My father was a paranoid man. He did not trust passwords. He did not trust keys. He trusted blood. To access the Legacy Trust, one needed 2 things. First, the biometric scan of the principal me. Second, the biometric scan of a blood relative to act as a witness and co-signatory. This was designed to prevent me from being coerced. The idea was that a family member would protect me. I was an only child. My parents were dead. Elara was my only living blood relative. The plan unfolded in my mind with sickening clarity. They did not just need my money, they needed my identity, and they needed Elara's blood, but they could not just walk into the bank with me. I would never agree to liquidate the trust, so they had to become me. I pulled up the specifications for the security system used by the Swiss bank that held the trust. It relied on facial recognition and voice authentication for the principal, and a physical blood key for the relative. Derek had the deepfake technology. I had heard him practicing in the pod. He had hours of footage of me from my public speeches, my video calls, my life. He could map my face onto a digital avatar that would fool even high-end sensors. But the blood key required a living, breathing person with Valen DNA to be physically present at the terminal. That was Elara. They were going to use a digital puppet of me, controlled by Derek, and the physical reality of Elara to bypass the dual authentication. It was a Frankenstein strategy stitching together bits of technology and biology to create a key that looked, sounded, and bled like the Valen family. The revulsion I felt was absolute. It was not just betrayal, it was a violation of my very existence. They were skinning me. They were wearing my life like a costume. I needed one last piece of the puzzle. I needed the timeline. I used my administrative override to access the shared cloud storage attached to our home network, the one Derek thought was just for family photos and grocery lists. He was careful, but arrogance makes people sloppy. He had left a draft email in the trash folder, assuming that hitting delete meant it was gone forever. Nothing is ever gone forever in my world. I recovered the file. It was an itinerary, subject Project Maldives, flight confirmation, private charter from Vancouver to Mail, departure, next Sunday, 11 p.m., passenger manifest, Mr. Derek Sterling, Mrs. Kennedy Valen. I stared at the name, Mrs. Kennedy Valen. Why would he book a ticket for me if he planned to steal my fortune and run away with Elara? Unless, I read further down the draft. There were notes, bullet points written in Derek's shorthand. Step 1, Aspen trip, anniversary celebration. Step 2, the hike, ridge trail, no cameras, no witnesses. Step 3, tragic fall, weather conditions favorable for slippery terrain. Step 4, grieving husband returns. Delayed notification to authorities due to shock. Step 5. Elara wears the wig and uses the prosthetic mask for the airport transfer. We leave the country as Mr. and Mrs. Sterling. The air in my office seemed to vanish. I could not breathe. This was not just theft. This was not just fraud. This was an execution. The anniversary trip, next week, we were booked for a romantic getaway to a private cabin in Aspen. Derek had suggested it a month ago. He had been so sweet about it. We need to reconnect, he had said. Just the two of us. No phones, no work, just nature. He was planning to kill me. He was going to push me off a cliff on the ridge trail. He would watch my body break on the rocks below. And then he would play the role of the devastated widower. And while the search and rescue teams were looking for my corpse, Elara would put on a wig, use the deepfake mask they had been perfecting, and board a plane with him to the Maldives using my passport. They would live on my money. They would sleep in my houses. They would erase me completely. I looked at the date on the calendar. Today was Saturday. We were leaving for Aspen on Wednesday. I had 4 days to live. Tears pricked at the corners of my eyes, hot and angry. I let them fall. I let myself feel the sheer, crushing weight of the horror. The man I had slept beside for 7 years, the man I had nursed through the flu, the man I had trusted with my life was not just a liar, he was a monster, and the girl I had treated like a little sister was holding the knife. I stood up and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window. Below me, the city of Seattle went about its Saturday morning. People were buying coffee, walking dogs, holding hands, living in the blissful ignorance of a world where husbands did not murder wives for crypto debts. I pressed my hand against the cold glass. My reflection stared back at me, pale, shocked, but underneath the fear, I saw something else. I saw the steel that my father had put in my spine. I saw the ruthless intelligence that had built Vanguard into an empire. They wanted a tragedy. Fine, I would give them a tragedy. But it would not be mine. I turned back to my desk. The tears were gone. My hands were steady. I picked up the phone and dialed a number that was not in any contact list. "We have a situation," I said when the voice on the other end answered. "I need full surveillance on 2 targets. Level 5 authorization. And I need the forensic accounting team ready to mirror a transaction in real time." There was a pause on the line. Then a simple reply. "Consider it done. Ms. Valen." I hung up. I looked at the draft email one last time. Step 3. Tragic fall. I deleted the file from my view, leaving the original exactly where he had left it in the trash folder. I wanted him to feel safe. I wanted him to think his plan was perfect. I wanted him to pack his bags for Aspen and dream of the Maldives, because when the fall happened, I would not be the one going over the edge. I sat in the silence of my office, the city of Seattle sprawling below me like a grid of integrated circuits. The revelation of the murder plot had left me cold, but panic was a luxury I could not afford. I needed to understand the mechanics of the betrayal. Derek was a finance guy, a numbers man. He could balance a ledger and hide debt, but he was not a hacker. He did not know how to splice video feeds or bypass the biometric sensors on the service hatch of a fortress-like penthouse. He had help. I turned my attention back to the security logs of my building. The timeline of the previous night nagged at me. Derek had exited through the service hatch to meet Elara. That much was certain, but the building's perimeter alarm should have triggered a silent alert to the concierge the moment that hatch was opened. It had not. That meant someone had disabled it from the inside, or worse, someone had tricked the system into thinking the hatch remained closed. I dove into the raw code of the security mainframe. My fingers flew across the holographic keyboard. I was looking for a ghost. A snippet of code that did not belong. Most people look for gaps in the footage, but I looked for repetitions. Reality is chaotic. It never repeats itself perfectly. I found it in the timestamp for Friday night at 8:15. The camera feed for the service corridor had looped for exactly 3 minutes. The grain on the image froze in a repeating pattern. It was subtle, invisible to the naked eye, but glaringly obvious to an algorithmic audit. Someone had injected a loop script to cover Derek's exit. But as I widened my search, examining the footage from previous weeks, I found something even more disturbing. There were multiple instances of looping, and there were instances of physical deception. I pulled up a video file from 2 weeks ago. It was a Tuesday evening. Derek had told me he was going down to the building's gym for a late workout. The footage showed a man wearing Derek's gray hoodie, his baseball cap pulled low, walking with Derek's distinct, loping stride toward the elevators. He carried a gym bag. He looked exactly like my husband. I zoomed in. I ran a skeletal analysis program. The gait was 99% accurate. The height was perfect. But the wrist? I froze the frame as the figure reached out to press the elevator button. The sleeve of the hoodie pulled back just an inch. Derek wore a vintage Patek Philippe watch on his left wrist. This man wore a cheap digital fitness tracker, and on the back of his hand, just below the thumb, was a small, jagged tattoo of a circuit board. I knew that tattoo. I leaned back in my chair, the leather groaning softly. Tobias Hale. He was a brilliant but unstable systems architect I had hired 3 years ago. He had a natural talent for intrusion detection, but he had a fatal flaw. He liked opioids more than he liked his job. I had fired him 6 months ago after finding him passed out in the server room, a needle in his arm. I had given him a severance package and the number for a rehab clinic, not because I was kind, but because I wanted him to go away quietly. It seemed he had not gone away. He had gone to Derek. I closed my laptop. I did not need a GPS tracker to find Tobias. I knew exactly where a man with his habits and his severance pay would end up. An hour later, I parked my matte black SUV in front of a crumbling brick tenement in the Pioneer Square district. It was a neighborhood that smelled of salt water and urine, a place where the tech boom of Seattle had not just forgotten people, it had paved over them. I wore a trench coat over my tailored suit and kept my hands in my pockets. I walked up the 3 flights of stairs, the wood rotting beneath my heels. Apartment 3B. The door was peeling green paint. I did not knock. I used a universal decoder tool, a device strictly restricted to law enforcement and people like me, to disengage the deadbolt. The door swung open. The smell hit me first. Stale pizza, unwashed laundry, and the acrid, chemical tang of burnt foil. The apartment was a single room, illuminated only by the blue glow of 3 computer monitors set up on a card table. Tobias was slumped in a gaming chair, wearing headphones, typing furiously. He was thinner than I remembered. His skin was the color of paste, and his hair was a greasy mess. I closed the door behind me and locked it. The sound made him jump. He spun around, ripping the headphones off. His eyes went wide when he saw me. "Ms. Vallon," he stammered. He scrambled backward, nearly tipping his chair over. "What are you doing here? You cannot just break in here." I did not raise my voice. I walked calm and steady toward his desk, scanning the room. I saw a pile of cash on the dresser, stacks of $100 bills bound with rubber bands. Derek's money. "I see you have found a new employer." "Tobias," I said, my voice cutting through the humid air of the room. Though I question his payment methods, cash is so messy. He licked his lips, his eyes darting toward the door. "I do not know what you are talking about. I am freelance now." I picked up a hoodie from the floor. It was a gray hoodie, identical to the one Derek wore. "Freelance," I repeated. "Is that what we are calling it? Impersonating a corporate executive, facilitating high-level identity theft, aiding and abetting a conspiracy to commit murder." That last word hit him like a physical slap. He flinched. "Murder, no. No way. It is just corporate espionage." He said he needed to sneak out to meet investors without the board knowing. He said he needed an alibi so you would not think he was cheating. I just looped the cameras and walked around in his clothes a few times. That is it. I looked at him with genuine pity. He was a pawn, a disposable tool. Derek Sterling owes $50 million to people who break legs for a living. I said, "He is not meeting investors. He is planning to kill me on a hiking trail in Aspen next Wednesday so he can cash out my trust fund and run away with my cousin. And you, Tobias, are the one who gave him the digital keys to the castle." Tobias went pale. He sank back into his chair, his hands shaking. "He did not tell me that, I swear. He just said he needed freedom. He pays me in crypto and cash. He has leverage on me." I leaned against his desk, crossing my arms. "Let me guess. He has video of you buying drugs, or maybe footage of you hacking into a federal database." Tobias looked at the floor. "He has photos of me selling fentanyl to a minor. It was not. I did not know the kid was 17, but he says he will send it to the DA if I stop helping him. I would go away for 20 years. Kennedy." I had no choice. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I tapped the screen and held it up. "You have 2 choices. Tobias, choice A, you continue working for Derek. In 4 days, I die. The police investigate. They find your digital fingerprints all over my building's security system because, let us be honest, you are good, but I am better. You go down as an accomplice to first-degree murder. That is life without parole. Tobias, no drugs in prison, just you and a concrete wall until you die." He started to hyperventilate. "Choice B," I continued, my voice softening just enough to offer him a lifeline. "You work for me." He looked up, tears in his eyes. "What you become a double agent," I said. "You continue to take Derek's calls. You continue to loop the cameras when he asks. You keep taking his cash, but you do exactly what I tell you to do. You report every request he makes to me first. And when the time comes, you give me access to the deepfake software you helped him install." He shook his head frantically. "He will release the photos. He will ruin me." I laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "Tobias, Look at me. I am Kennedy Vallon. I own the company that secures the district attorney's cloud storage. If those photos exist, I can make them disappear before Derek can even hit send. I can wipe your entire criminal record. I can give you a clean slate. Or I can bury you so deep that even Google will not find you. He stared at me, weighing the terror of his current master against the power of his former one. He looked at the cash on the dresser, then at the gray hoodie on the floor. He realized what Derek had never realized: money is power, but information is God. And I held all the information. I will do it, he whispered. I will help you. Good, I said. I walked around the desk and pushed him aside. I sat in his chair and pulled a small flash drive from my pocket. I plugged it into his main terminal. What is that? He asked. Insurance. I said, this is a rootkit. It gives me real-time access to your computer and your phone. If you try to warn Derek, if you type a single message I do not approve, it will brick your systems and auto-send a confession to the FBI. I typed rapidly, installing the software. The screen flashed green, then returned to normal. I pulled the drive out. Now, I said, standing up, show me the deepfake parameters. I want to see how good his mask is. Tobias hesitated, then typed a command. A window opened on the center monitor. It was a 3D rendering of my face. It was perfect. The avatar blinked, smiled, and tilted its head. It spoke in my voice. Hello, Derek. I am so happy. It was chilling. It was a digital ghost, waiting to inhabit my life. He wanted me to calibrate the micro-expressions yesterday. Tobias mumbled. He said it needed to look convincing enough to fool a bank teller over a 4K video feed. And the voice, I asked? He has hours of your speeches. We built a synthesizer model. It can say anything he types. I stared at my digital twin. A plan began to form in the back of my mind. A cruel, poetic plan. If Derek wanted to play with dolls, I would let him, but I would be the one pulling the strings. Keep it calibrated. I ordered. Make it perfect. I want him to feel confident. I turned to leave. At the door, I paused and looked back at the pathetic figure of the man who had helped steal my privacy. One more thing. Tobias, when he asks for the security loop on Wednesday, the day we leave for Aspen, you tell him the system needs a hard reset to avoid detection. Tell him there will be a 10-second window where the cameras are offline. Why, he asked, confused. Because, I said, opening the door, I need to move some pieces around the board, and I do not want anyone watching. I walked out into the dimly lit hallway. The smell of decay was still there, but now it smelled like victory. I had closed the breach. I had turned his pawn into my queen. My phone buzzed as I got into my car. It was Derek. Hey, honey. Just thinking about our trip. I cannot wait to get away with you. I looked at the message and felt a cold smile touch my lips. I typed back, me neither. Darling, it is going to be a trip to die for. I started the engine. The game had changed. He thought he was the player, but he was just another line of code in a program I was rewriting, and I was about to execute the final command. I was done reacting. It was time to start conducting. In cybersecurity, we have a term for this strategy: the honeypot. You do not build a higher wall to keep the attacker out. You build a door that looks like a mistake. A vulnerability so tempting that they cannot resist walking through it. And once they are inside, they realize too late that the room has no exit. Sunday morning, I woke up with a plan that was as elegant as it was devastating. Derek was in the kitchen making coffee, whistling a tune that sounded suspiciously happy for a man facing $50 million in debt. He thought he was 4 days away from freedom in Aspen. I needed to accelerate his timeline. I needed him to make his move here, on my turf, where I controlled the environment. I shuffled into the kitchen, wrapped in a silk robe, feigning a slight limp and a pale complexion. Good morning, Kennedy, he said, pouring me a cup. You look a bit washed out. Are you feeling okay? I sat down heavily on the bar stool, rubbing my temples. Not really. I have had these dizzy spells lately. My doctor thinks it might be stress. But, honestly, Derek, it has got me thinking about the future, about legacy. His ears pricked up. The whistling stopped. What do you mean I took a sip of coffee? Avoiding his eyes. If something happened to me, I need to make sure everything is in order. The Valen Legacy Trust has been sitting dormant for too long. I think it is time to update the signatory protocols. Just in case. I saw the flash of greed in his eyes, quick and sharp like a shark fin cutting water. He leaned in, his voice dripping with faux concern. You should not talk like that. You are young, healthy, but if it gives you peace of mind, maybe we should look at it together. I nodded weakly. I am going to log in later today. I need to generate a new authentication key for the Swiss accounts. It is complicated. I might need your help with the dual-factor setup. I left that hanging in the airbait on a hook. An hour later, I was in my home office. I knew he was watching, not physically, but digitally. He had keylogger software installed on my laptop software. I had allowed Tobias to leave active, but routed through a sandbox environment. Derek saw what I wanted him to see. I opened the secure portal for the Valen Legacy Trust, or rather, a perfect clone of it. I had spent the last 6 hours coding a dummy interface. It looked identical to the real Swiss banking site, the same font, the same logo, the same encryption handshake protocols. But instead of connecting to the vaults in Zurich, it connected to a contained server sitting in the basement of the FBI's cybercrime division. I typed in a new master code, VALEN 7734. I let the cursor hover over the Confirm New Signatory button for a few seconds longer than necessary, giving his spyware ample time to capture the screen. Then I clicked Save immediately. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a notification from the Ghost app mirroring Derek's phone. He had just sent a text to Elara. Fish has bitten. She just reset the keys. We do not need to wait for Aspen. Prepare the transfer protocol for Friday. I smiled. He took the bait. Aspen was messy. A hiking accident required physical exertion and left forensic evidence, a digital transfer from the comfort of his own home. That was clean. That was fast. And it was exactly what I wanted. But I needed a stage. A transfer of that magnitude required time at least 10 minutes of uninterrupted access to the biometric scanner in my office. He needed a distraction. I walked out to the living room where Derek was pretending to read a magazine. Derek, I said, my voice gaining a bit of strength, I have been thinking, since we are updating the trust, I want to make a public statement about our partnership. I want to announce that you are taking over as the honorary CEO of the Valen Foundation. He dropped the magazine. CEO Kennedy, that is. Are you sure I sat next to him and took his hand? You have stood by me through everything. You deserve the recognition. I want to throw a gala. This Friday night, here at the penthouse, we will invite everyone. The board, our partners, your investors. It will be the perfect send-off before our trip to Aspen. His mind was racing. I could see the calculations behind his eyes. A party meant chaos. A party meant hundreds of people, loud music, and a distracted wife. It was the perfect cover, while I was busy playing hostess. He and Elara could slip away to fix a technical issue in my office and execute the transfer using the key I had just accidentally revealed. It sounds wonderful. Kennedy, he said, squeezing my hand, let us do it. Monday and Tuesday were a blur of logistics. I hired caterers, florists, and musicians. But my most important meetings were not with event planners. On Tuesday afternoon, I met with Agent Miller from the FBI's cyber division in a nondescript coffee shop 3 blocks from my office. He was a man who looked like an accountant, but thought like a predator. We have the warrant, Miller said, sliding a thin manila envelope across the table. Based on the evidence provided by your source, Mr. Hale, and the data you captured from the safe house, we are ready to move on Friday. I do not want you to arrest them at the door, I said, taking a sip of my black tea. I want them to complete the transaction. Miller frowned. That is risky. Ms. Valen, if the funds actually move, they will not move, I interrupted. The destination account in the dummy trust is a trap. It is a smart contract I wrote myself. The moment they execute the transfer, the code triggers a reversal loop. The money stays put. But the digital signature of the theft is permanently recorded on the blockchain. It is undeniable proof of intent and execution. And the arrest, Miller asked. Wait for my signal. I said, I want them to think they have won. I want to see the look on their faces when the account balance hits 0. Miller nodded slowly, a hint of respect in his eyes. You are cold, Ms. Valen. I learned from the best, I replied, thinking of the man I had married. Wednesday came. I needed to secure the other half of the key, Elara. I invited her over for lunch. She arrived looking flustered, wearing a dress that was slightly too expensive for an executive assistant's salary. She hugged me, her body stiff. Kennedy, I am so excited for the gala, she chirped. Derek told me the news. He is going to be a great CEO. I smiled, pouring her a glass of iced tea. He is, and I could not have done it without you. Elara, you have been such a support to both of us. I reached into my bag and pulled out a velvet box. I wanted to give you something to wear on Friday. I opened it to reveal a platinum bracelet studded with sapphires. It was stunning. It was also custom modified by my tech team. Inside the clasp was a high-fidelity microphone and a localized GPS beacon that transmitted even through concrete walls. Elara gasped. Kennedy, this is too much. I cannot accept this. We are family, I said, fastening it around her wrist. It clicked shut with a definitive snap. Promise me you will wear it on Friday. It matches your eyes. I promise, she said, admiring the gems, oblivious to the fact that she had just handcuffed herself to my surveillance network. Thursday night, the penthouse transformed. The caterers began setting up. The sound system was tested, and while the staff was distracted, I went to the central control panel for the smart home system in the utility closet. I inserted a physical override key. I was about to turn my home into a prison. I reprogrammed the door locks. Normally, they opened from the inside with a simple handle turn for fire safety. I engaged the lockdown mode, a feature designed for active shooter situations. Once activated, the doors would magnetic lock with 2,000 pounds of force. The windows, already reinforced glass, would tint to opaque black, cutting off the view. The elevators would lock on the penthouse floor. I routed the control of this mode to a single remote in my pocket. Friday arrived. The air was electric. I spent the afternoon getting ready. My makeup artist commented on how pale I looked. Just excited. I told her, I chose a dress that was armor crimson red silk, backless, sharp and dangerous. Derek came in while I was putting on my earrings. He was wearing a tuxedo. He looked devastatingly handsome. He looked like the man I had fallen in love with. You look breathtaking, he said, standing behind me in the mirror. Thank you, I said, meeting his gaze in the reflection. Are you ready for your big night? He smiled, adjusting his cufflinks. More than you know. I know exactly how ready you are. I thought, at 6 o'clock, the first guests arrived. The penthouse filled with the murmur of expensive conversation and the clinking of crystal. The elite of Seattle were here, tech moguls, politicians, venture capitalists. And unbeknownst to them, 12 undercover FBI agents disguised as waitstaff and security personnel. I moved through the crowd, playing the perfect hostess. I laughed at bad jokes. I accepted compliments. I kept my eye on Derek. He was working the room, shaking hands, radiating charisma. Elara was by his side, the sapphire bracelet glinting on her wrist. At 7:30, the signal came. I saw Derek check his watch. He glanced at Elara, a subtle nod. Kennedy, Derek said, coming over to me with a concerned look. There is a slight issue with the projection system in the study for the presentation. Elara and I are going to run in and fix it quickly. We will be back in 10 minutes for the speech. Of course. Darling, I said, touching his arm. Do not take too long. Everyone is waiting for you. I watched them walk away toward the hallway that led to my office. They moved with a sense of purpose, thinking they were invisible in the chaos of the party. I waited until they turned the corner, then I pulled the small remote from my clutch. I pressed the button labeled Stage 1. The heavy oak doors of my office clicked shut behind them. I heard the faint mechanical whir of the magnetic locks engaging. They were in. I pulled out my phone and opened the app connected to Elara's bracelet. The audio feed was crystal clear. "Hurry up. Lock the door." Derek's voice hissed. "I am trying. My hands are shaking." Elara replied, "Just get to the terminal. Remember the sequence. Handshake first, then the blood scan." The gala was a masterpiece of superficial brilliance. The penthouse was bathed in golden light, the air thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the low hum of power being traded over champagne flutes. A live jazz quartet played a smooth, languid rendition of "Fly Me to the Moon" in the corner, the saxophone notes curling around the room like smoke. Waiters in white gloves moved like ghosts, refilling glasses before they were even half empty. Derek and Elara were the stars of the show, or so they believed. Derek looked every inch the future CEO in his midnight blue tuxedo. His smile practiced and dazzling. Elara, in a shimmering silver gown that clung to her like a second skin, stood by his side, playing the role of the devoted assistant and supportive family member perfectly. They laughed at the right moments, touched arms with just the right amount of platonic affection, and accepted congratulations with humble nods. But I saw the cracks. I saw the way Derek's eyes darted toward the clock on the wall every 3 minutes. I saw the way Elara's fingers twisted the sapphire bracelet I had given her, her knuckles white with tension. And most importantly, I saw the men standing near the bar. 3 of them. They wore suits that were expensive but ill-fitting, the fabric straining against thick necks and bulky shoulders. They did not mingle. They did not smile. They watched Derek with the cold, predatory patience of sharks circling a wounded seal. These were not investors. These were the debt collectors. Their presence was the silent gun pressed against Derek's temple, forcing him to pull the trigger tonight. I circulated through the room, a glass of sparkling water in my hand. I needed a clear head. Kennedy, darling Mrs. Whitman, the wife of a senator. Grab my arm. This party is divine. And Derek, he seems so energized. He certainly is, I replied, my smile tight. He has a lot riding on tonight. I glanced across the room. Derek caught my eye and gave me a thumbs up. It was a gesture so casual, so confident, that for a split second, I felt a wave of nausea. How could he look at me with such warmth while counting down the minutes until he could steal my life? Then, the signal came. It was subtle. Derek tapped his nose twice, a prearranged code with Elara. She immediately put a hand to her stomach, grimacing slightly, and whispered something to the person she was talking to. "Excuse me, I need some air." She began to weave her way toward the hallway leading to the private wing of the penthouse. Derek waited exactly 30 seconds. Then he excused himself from his conversation with the shark-like men at the bar. Pointing toward the restroom, they were moving. I did not follow them. Instead, I walked calmly toward a secluded alcove near the balcony where I could see the room but remain partially hidden. I pulled out my phone. The screen showed the feed from the hidden camera inside my study. The room was dark, illuminated only by the glow of my obsidian desk terminal. The door opened, and a slice of light cut across the floor. Elara slipped in first, followed closely by Derek. He closed the door and locked it. I watched as Derek rushed to the desk, his composure vanishing instantly. He was sweating. He ripped off his bow tie and threw it on the leather chair. "Boot it up," he hissed. "We have a 10-minute window before Kennedy expects me for the toast." Elara sat in my chair, her hands trembling as she reached for the keyboard. "I am trying." "Derek, my hands are shaking. Just breathe." "Elara, remember the training. You are Kennedy. Be Kennedy." I watched on my small screen as Elara took a deep breath. She pulled a small case from her clutch. Inside were the contact lenses custom-made to mimic my retinal pattern. She popped them into her eyes, blinking rapidly. She leaned forward. The retinal scanner beam washed over her face in a red grid. Identity confirmed, Kennedy Vallon. The system voice was cool and mechanical. Now the voice print. Derek ordered, pacing behind her. "Use the synthesizer." Elara typed a command. A digital waveform appeared on the screen. She pressed play. "Authorize transfer. Protocol 7734. It was my voice, perfectly synthesized. The cadence, the pitch, the slight huskiness, it was indistinguishable from reality. Voice authorization accepted. Second signatory required. Now you, Derek said. The blood key. He grabbed Elara's hand, the one wearing my sapphire bracelet, and slammed it onto the biometric palm scanner. The needle prick was instant. The machine whirred, analyzing the blood sample, checking for the specific genetic markers of the Valen line. I held my breath in the alcove. This was the moment. The technology worked. They had beaten the biometrics. Identity confirmed, Elara Vance. Family witness verified. Access granted. On the screen in the study, the interface for the Swiss bank account opened. The balance was displayed in bold green numbers. $482 million. Derek let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. He grabbed Elara's shoulders, shaking her. We did it. We are in. Transfer it, he commanded. All of it, to the Cayman account. Now. Elara's fingers flew across the keyboard. She entered the routing number for the offshore shell company they had set up. She typed in the amount, all funds. She hit execute. A progress bar appeared on the screen. Processing, 20%, 50%, 80%. My phone buzzed in my hand. It was a text from Tobias, who was stationed in the server room 3 floors down. They are in the honeypot. The dummy server is accepting the request. I watched the progress bar hit 100%. Transfer complete. Derek threw his head back and let out a primal yell of triumph. He pulled Elara out of the chair and spun her around. We are rich. We are free. 50 million gone, and 400 million left to play with. Elara was laughing, tears streaming down her face. We really did it. We really did it. They hugged, a desperate, clingy embrace of 2 people who had just walked through fire and thought they hadn't been burned. But then, the light in the study changed. The soft blue glow of the monitor turned a harsh, pulsing red. Derek froze. He pulled away from Elara and looked at the screen. What is that? He asked, his voice dropping. A new message box had appeared in the center of the screen. Alert, unauthorized geolocation detected. Funds frozen. Data destruction protocol initiated. What does that mean? Elara screamed. What is data destruction? Derek shoved her aside and started pounding on the keyboard. No, 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 cancel, undo. A countdown timer appeared on the screen. 60, 59, 58. It is deleting the keys. Derek yelled. It is wiping the access codes. We are losing it. He tried to enter the override command, but the keyboard was unresponsive. The cursor was locked. 50, 49, 48. Do something. Elara shrieked. You said you knew the system. I do not know this. This is not part of the protocol, Derek screamed back, sweat pouring down his face. I watched them panic. It was beautiful. The chaos was absolute. They were watching $400 million evaporate before their eyes, trapped in a room with no way out. I put my phone back in my clutch. It was time. I stepped out of the alcove and signaled to the stage manager. He nodded and dimmed the house lights. A spotlight hit the center of the stage. The music stopped. The conversation died down. All eyes turned to the empty stage. I walked up the steps, my red dress blazing under the spotlight. I took the microphone. The silence in the room was heavy with anticipation. They expected a toast. They expected a celebration. Ladies and gentlemen, I began, my voice projecting clearly to every corner of the room. I promised you a special night. I promised to show you the future of the Valen family. I looked directly at the camera at the back of the room, the one feeding the live stream to the internet, and more importantly, to the massive LED screen behind me. My husband and my cousin have been working very hard on a project, I continued, my tone shifting from warm to icy. They wanted to surprise me, and I think they deserve to share that surprise with all of you. I raised my hand and snapped my fingers. Show them, I commanded. The ballroom of the penthouse, usually a sanctuary of polite society and hushed deals, had transformed into an amphitheater of public execution. The massive LED screen, which moments ago had been a blank slate, was now a window into hell. The guests, a sea of tuxedos and designer gowns, stood frozen, their champagne flutes forgotten in their hands. They were witnessing a dissection. On the screen, the chaos in the study was absolute. The red emergency lighting pulsed like a warning beacon, casting long, frantic shadows across Derek's face. He was no longer the charming executive. He was a cornered animal, that bitch Kennedy. His voice, amplified by the state-of-the-art sound system, boomed through the ballroom with terrifying clarity. He was slamming his fist onto the obsidian desk, rattling the very foundations of his digital theft. "I will kill her, I swear to God. I will kill her the second this money clears." The crowd gasped, as one entity, a woman in the front row, the wife of a bank CEO, dropped her glass. It shattered on the marble floor. A sharp, crisp sound that punctuated Derek's threat. On screen, Elara was hysterical. She was pulling at her hair, her silver gown disheveled. "You said it was safe. You said she was stupid," she shrieked, her voice cracking. "Where is my money? You promised me 50 million. I gave you her blood. I gave you her DNA." The confession hung in the air, naked and ugly. I gave you her blood. I stood on the stage, the microphone cool in my hand. I did not look at the screen. I looked at the people. I saw shock. I saw disgust. And in the eyes of the debt collectors by the bar, I saw a cold, hard calculation. They realized their investment was not just bad, it was radioactive. "As you can see," I said, my voice cutting through the murmurs like a scalpel. "My family has a unique way of bonding. Most cousins share recipes. Mine shares genetic material to bypass bank security. Most husbands plan anniversary trips. Mine plans murder for an insurance payout." I gestured casually toward the screen behind me. "This is not a technical glitch," I continued. "This is a live feed from the room directly down that hallway. And what you are seeing is not a deepfake. It is the raw, unedited footage of two people realizing that they are not the predators they thought they were." Inside the study, the reality of the situation began to dawn on them. The red light on the monitor stopped blinking. The countdown had ended. The screen in front of them went black, then flashed a single message, broadcasting live. Derek froze. He looked up, his eyes locking onto the camera lens hidden in the bookshelf. He saw the red tally light. He heard my voice, my real voice. Not the synthesized one echoing from the speakers in the ceiling of the study. Not the predators they thought they were. He spun around. Elara stopped screaming. They both looked at the door. "We are live," Derek whispered, his face draining of all color. "Oh my God." Elara whimpered. "Oh my God. They can see us." They scrambled toward the door. Derek grabbed the handle and yanked it. It did not budge. He threw his shoulder against the solid oak. Desperate, frantic. "Open the door," he screamed, pounding on the wood. "Let us out." But the magnetic locks held firm. 2,000 pounds of force does not yield to panic. I watched them struggle for a moment, letting the futility sink in. Then, I decided it was time to remove the final barrier. The study in my penthouse had a unique architectural feature. The wall facing the living room, the wall that separated their private panic from the public spectacle, was made of electrochromic smart glass. Normally, it was set to opaque, looking like a sleek black wall. I tapped a button on my remote. Transparency 100%. Instantly, the black wall vanished. The effect was visceral. 1 second, Derek and Elara were images on a screen. The next, they were physically revealed, trapped behind a floor-to-ceiling pane of glass like specimens in a zoo exhibit. The crowd recoiled. The distance between observer and subject had collapsed. Derek stumbled back from the glass, shielding his eyes from the sudden glare of the ballroom spotlights. He looked out at the sea of faces staring back at him. He saw his boss. He saw his investors. He saw the debt collectors. And he saw me. Standing on the stage in my red dress, looking down at him with the serene expression of a judge delivering a verdict. "Kennedy," he screamed, his voice muffled but audible through the glass. "Kennedy, stop this. It is a mistake, I can explain. I did not answer. I simply raised my microphone. There is nothing to explain. Derek, I said, my voice amplified so he could hear me clearly. We all heard you, we all saw you, and just so you know, the transfer you just authorized, it did not go to the Cayman Islands. It went to a holding account controlled by the Federal Bureau of Investigation. You just confessed to federal wire fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit murder in front of 300 witnesses. Elara sank to the floor, covering her face with her hands. She was sobbing, her body shaking violently. The realization of her ruin was total. She was 24 years old, and her life was effectively over. Derek, however, was not ready to accept defeat. He looked around the room, his eyes wild. He spotted the debt collectors near the bar. "Tony," he yelled, banging on the glass. "Tony, help me. I can get the money." "It is a glitch, I swear, Tony." A man with a neck like a tree trunk simply took a sip of his drink and turned his back. It was the ultimate dismissal. Derek was no longer an asset. He was a liability. The flashing lights began. It started with one phone, then another, then a dozen. The guests, overcoming their initial shock, were pulling out their smartphones. They were recording. They were live streaming. The hashtags were probably already trending. Valengala Live, Confession Karma. Derek and Elara were being immortalized in the worst possible way. They were becoming a meme. I stepped down from the stage and walked toward the glass wall. The crowd parted for me like the Red Sea. I stopped inches from the glass, looking Derek directly in the eye. He stopped pounding. He leaned his forehead against the pane, breathing heavy, ragged breaths. He looked small. He looked pathetic. The monster I had feared for the last 4 days was gone, replaced by a desperate, sweaty man in a ruined tuxedo. Why, I asked softly, though the microphone picked it up. Was 50 million worth it? Was erasing me worth it? He looked up, tears mixing with the sweat on his face. "I just wanted to be free," he mouthed. "I just wanted to be someone other than Mr. Kennedy Valen." I nodded slowly. "Well, congratulations. Derek, you got your wish. You are not Mr. Kennedy Valen anymore. You are inmate number, whatever the warden assigns you." I turned my back on him. It was the hardest thing I had ever done, and yet the easiest. I walked away from the glass cage, leaving them to the judgment of the crowd and the flashing lights of the cameras. The sound of sirens began to wail in the distance, growing louder with every second. The cavalry was arriving, but they were late to the party. The justice had already been served. The heavy thud of combat boots on marble echoed through the penthouse as the service elevator doors slid open. 12 FBI agents in tactical gear poured into the room, their weapons drawn but lowered, moving with the precise, fluid discipline of a raid team that had rehearsed this moment. The guests parted like water, a collective gasp rippling through the crowd as the reality of federal law enforcement crashed the party. "Federal agents," a voice boomed. "Remain where you are." Agent Miller stepped to the front, his badge catching the glare of the ballroom lights. He looked toward the glass cage where Derek and Elara stood trembling, then turned his eyes to me for the final signal. He raised his hand, ready to order the breach. I raised my own hand, palm out. "Wait," I said, my voice projecting clearly over the sudden silence. "Not yet. Agent Miller, they need to see the receipt." Miller hesitated, then nodded once. Lowering his hand, he understood. This was not just an arrest. It was a foreclosure on a soul. I turned back to the glass wall. Inside the study, Derek was staring at the computer screen. The red warning light had vanished, replaced by a calm, benign blue background. A new message box had appeared, distinct and final. I tapped the remote in my hand, diverting the feed from the study monitor to the massive LED screen behind me so the entire room could read the verdict. The text was simple: transaction complete. Source accounts, D. Sterling Cayman Holdings, E. Vance Personal Savings, D. Sterling Crypto Wallet, cold storage, total amount transferred, $11,420,000. Recipient: the Sentinel Foundation for Victims of Domestic Abuse. Status: irreversible. Derek read the words. I watched his lips move, struggling to process the syntax. He blinked, shaking his head as if trying to clear a hallucination. Then he frantically pulled his phone from his pocket, the personal one he had kept on him. He opened his banking app. He opened his crypto exchange portfolio. He swiped down to refresh. His knees buckled. He did not fall gracefully. He crumpled, sliding down the glass wall until he hit the floor. The phone slipped from his fingers and landed screen up. Even from where I stood, I could see the balance. 0. What did you do? He whispered, the sound vibrating through the glass. What did you do to my money? I stepped closer to the microphone. You thought you were hacking into my trust fund. Derek, you thought you were using my biometric data to authorize a withdrawal. But you were not on the Swiss bank's server. You were on mine. I paced slowly in front of the glass, addressing him like a prosecutor delivering a closing argument. The interface you interacted with was a mirror site, I explained, my tone clinical. It was a honeypot designed with a specific smart contract embedded in the handshake protocol to receive the $400 million you thought you were stealing. You had to link your own offshore wallets and verify them with your biometric signature. You thought you were opening a door to let money in. In reality, you opened a door to let everything out. I paused, letting the irony sink in. The contract you just authorized with your own blood and retina scan was a deed of gift. It granted immediate, irrevocable power of attorney to the Sentinel Foundation to liquidate all assets attached to your verified identity. You did not just fail to rob me, Derek. You just donated every cent you have ever stolen, hidden, or saved to a charity that protects women from men exactly like you. Derek looked up at me, his face a mask of absolute horror. It was not the fear of prison that broke him. It was the poverty. He was a man defined by his balance sheet, and I had just erased his existence. My crypto, he choked out. The cold storage keys. Gone, I said. Swept in the first 3 seconds of the transfer, and since you used the blockchain to verify the transaction, the ledger is public. There is no undo button. You are destitute. Derek. Elara, who had been huddled in the corner, let out a wail of despair. She looked at her phone, seeing her own modest savings vanish into the ether. My tuition money, my inheritance from Mom, it is all gone. Consider it a tuition fee for the lesson you just learned, I said coldly. I nodded to Agent Miller. Open it, Miller signaled his team. One of the agents stepped forward with a specialized electronic key. He swiped it across the control panel of the study door. The magnetic locks disengaged with a heavy, metallic clank. The door swung open. The sound of the lock breaking seemed to snap something inside Derek. The despair in his eyes hardened into a sudden, rabid fury. He scrambled to his feet, his movements jerky and uncoordinated. You ruined me, he screamed, lunging through the open doorway. You bitch, I will kill you. He sprinted across the short distance between the study and the stage, his hands curled into claws, his eyes fixed on my throat. The crowd screamed. I did not flinch. I did not move. 2 feet before he could reach me, a massive shape stepped into his path. It was my head of security, a former Navy SEAL who had been waiting in the shadows of the curtain. He did not strike Derek. He simply intercepted him. He caught Derek by the lapels of his ruined tuxedo and slammed him onto the marble floor with a force that shook the stage. Derek gasped. The wind knocked out of him. Before he could scramble up, 2 FBI agents were on top of him, twisting his arms behind his back. The click of handcuffs was sharp and definitive. Get off me! Derek spat, thrashing against the marble. She set me up. This is entrapment. She stole my money. We have a warrant for your arrest. Mr. Sterling, Agent Miller said, reading him his rights with practiced indifference. You have the right to remain silent. I suggest you use it. Elara stumbled out of the study behind him. She was not attacking. She was collapsing. She looked around the room, her eyes wide and wet. seeking sympathy that was not there. "I did not know," she sobbed, holding her hands up in surrender. "He forced me. I was scared. He said he would hurt me if I did not help him. I am a victim here." She looked at me, her face twisting into a pleading mask. "Kennedy, please. You know me. I would never hurt you. He made me do it." I looked down at her from the stage. "He forced you," I repeated. "Yes, yes," she cried, nodding frantically. "He is controlling. He is abusive. I just did what I had to do to survive." I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. "That is an interesting theory, Elara, but my jewelry tends to remember things differently." I opened the app connected to the sapphire bracelet, the one she was still wearing, the one that had just recorded her downfall. I scrolled back to a timestamp from 3 days ago. "This was recorded on Wednesday," I announced to the room. "When you came over for lunch, when you thought I was in the kitchen getting more ice." I pressed play and held the microphone to the speaker. Elara's voice, clear and distinct, filled the ballroom. "We cannot just push her. Derek, it is too risky. What if she survives the fall? We need to be sure." Then Derek's voice, "What do you suggest?" Then Elara again, her tone cold and calculating. "Succinylcholine. It mimics a heart attack. It breaks down in the system quickly. I can inject it into her insulin pen. She uses it every night. She will just go to sleep and never wake up. It is cleaner, and we get the body for a closed casket." The recording ended. The silence in the room was absolute. Even the FBI agents paused. The guests looked at Elara with a revulsion reserved for things that crawl out of dark places. I looked at my cousin. She had stopped crying. Her face had gone slack, the mask of the victim dissolving to reveal the cold, empty narcissist beneath. "Succinylcholine," I said softly. "You did not just want my money. Elara, you wanted to watch me die. You wanted to inject me with poison and then comfort my husband at the funeral." Elara sank to her knees, burying her face in her hands. There was no defense left. The bracelet on her wrist glinted under the lights, a beautiful, expensive shackle. An agent stepped forward and pulled Elara to her feet. She did not resist as the cuffs were locked around her wrists. She moved like a doll with the strings cut. Derek was hauled to his feet next to her. He was panting, his hair plastered to his forehead. He looked around the room, desperate for a lifeline. His eyes landed on the group of men near the bar, the debt collectors. They were still standing there. They had watched the entire spectacle without expression. But now, as Derek looked at them, the leader of the group, Tony, slowly buttoned his jacket. He looked at Derek, then looked at the screen that showed the zero balance. He shook his head slowly, a look of profound disappointment on his face. It was the look a butcher gives a piece of meat that has spoiled. Derek saw it. He understood. The FBI was the least of his problems. In prison, he would be a target. He owed $50 million to dangerous men, and he had just lost his only way to pay. "Please," Derek whispered, looking at Agent Miller. "Please, take me out of here. Take me into custody. Now." I stepped down from the stage and walked over to him one last time. I stood close enough to smell the fear on him, masking the scent of the vanilla noir perfume he had worn to betray me. "You know," I said, my voice low and intimate, just for him. "You always told me that second phone was for work." He flinched, unable to meet my eyes. "You were right," I continued, leaning in. "It was for work, because the evidence on that phone is going to be working very hard for the next 20 years to keep you in a federal cell." I stepped back. "Get them out of my house." Agent Miller nodded. "Let's go." The agents formed a perimeter around the two prisoners as they began the march toward the elevators. The room erupted. The flashes of 100 smartphones created a strobe light effect, illuminating Derek and Elara in harsh, staccato bursts. They were paraded past their former friends, past the investors they had tried to defraud, past the high society they had so desperately wanted to rule. Derek kept his head down, trying to hide his face from the cameras. Elara stared blankly ahead, the sapphire bracelet heavy on her wrist. I watched them go. I felt no joy. I felt no sadness. I felt only the cold, clean satisfaction of a balance sheet finally zeroed out. The elevator doors opened. The agents shoved them inside. Derek looked back at me one last time just as the doors began to close. His eyes were hollow. He was already a ghost. The doors shut. I turned back to the room. The guests were staring at me, unsure of what to do. Was the party over? Was it just beginning? I walked back to the stage and picked up my glass of champagne. I raised it to the crowd. "The gala is over," I said calmly, "but the bar is open for another hour. Please, drink up. It is on the house. After all, I just saved $400 million. The aftermath of the gala was not a scandal. It was a supernova. The live stream of Derek and Elara's confession had been viewed 15 million times within the first 24 hours. The hashtag #ValenVengeance was trending on every continent. The world was captivated not just by the betrayal, but by the execution of the trap. They called me the Ice Queen of Cybersecurity, a title I accepted with a grim satisfaction. Normally, a public spectacle involving a CEO's personal life would send stock prices tumbling, but the market is a strange beast. It respects power, and it worships competence. Vanguard Crisis Solutions. Stock did not dip. It skyrocketed. I had essentially turned my own trauma into the ultimate product demo. If Kennedy Valen could protect her own fortune from a sophisticated insider attack involving deepfakes and biometric spoofing, imagine what she could do for your company. Client inquiries tripled overnight, but while the world applauded, I had a mess to clean up. The legal dismantling of my marriage was efficient and brutal. I did not hire a divorce lawyer. I hired a demolition team. With the FBI's evidence, the wire fraud, the conspiracy to commit murder, the identity theft, the prenuptial agreement was not just enforced, it was weaponized. The judge granted an expedited dissolution of the marriage on the grounds of extreme cruelty and criminal intent. It took exactly 4 days to erase Derek Sterling from my legal identity. My next step was corporate hygiene. Derek had been careful, but corruption is like mold. It spreads. I ordered a forensic audit of every vendor, every contractor, and every employee Derek had ever interacted with. I fired 3 junior accountants who had looked the other way when Derek fudged expense reports. I terminated the contract with the security firm that had failed to flag the loop in the camera system. I stripped the company down to the studs and rebuilt it with people who feared me more than they loved money. And then there was Tobias. I found him in the same crumbling apartment, packing a bag. He looked terrified when I walked in, expecting arrest. Instead, I handed him a contract. "What is this?" he asked, his hands shaking. "Employment," I said. "Director of Penetration Testing. You will lead a team of white-hat hackers to stress test our clients' systems. The salary is $200,000 a year." He stared at me, dumbfounded. Why I helped him? "You helped him because you were weak," I said. "But you helped me because you are smart. I can fix weak. I cannot fix stupid." I pointed to the fine print. "There are conditions, mandatory drug testing every week. You attend rehab sessions 3 times a week, and you have a 24-hour monitor on your devices. One slip-up, 1 pill, 1 unauthorized line of code, and the deal is void. And the FBI gets the photos. Do we have an understanding?" Tobias nodded, tears welling in his eyes. Yes, absolutely. He was a broken toy. But he was my broken toy now, and he was brilliant. With the business secured, I turned to the personal wreckage. The penthouse was tainted. Every room held a memory of a lie. The kitchen where he made coffee, the sofa where I found the phone, the study where they tried to rob me. I could not breathe there. I listed it for sale on Monday morning. By Tuesday afternoon, it was sold to a tech billionaire from Silicon Valley who wanted it specifically because of its notoriety. He paid 20% over the asking price. I took the check and did not look back. I did not keep the furniture. I did not keep the art. I hired a moving company to strip the place bare and donate everything to a network of homeless shelters. The BB Italia sofa, the marble tables, the silk rugs, let them provide comfort to people who actually needed it. I wanted nothing that Derek had touched, but the most painful discovery came when I was clearing out the master closet. I found a box of jewelry boxes and dust bags tucked away on a high shelf. These were the gifts Derek had given me over the years. The Chanel bag for my 30th birthday, the Cartier necklace for our 5th anniversary, the diamond earrings he had surprised me with last Christmas. I had always cherished them as symbols of his love, but now, with my eyes wide open, I looked closer. I took the Chanel bag and examined the stitching under a magnifying loupe. It was slightly uneven. The serial number tag inside lacked the holographic sheen of authenticity. I checked the diamond earrings with a thermal tester I had brought from the office. Glass, high quality, leaded glass. I went through everything. The Hermes scarves, the Tiffany bracelets. Every single item was a fake, a super fake. Yes, the kind that costs a few $100s and fools 99% of people, but a fake nonetheless. The realization hit me harder than the theft of the money. He had been stealing from me to fund his gambling addiction, and then using the winnings to buy me counterfeit love. He had been laughing at me every time I wore them. Look at the rich girl. He must have thought, walking around with a $50 bag and thinking she is a queen. I packed them all into a garbage bag. I did not donate them. You do not donate lies. I moved into a new house 2 weeks later. It was a modern, minimalist structure made of concrete and glass. Perched on a cliff overlooking the Pacific Ocean in Big Sur, it was isolated, windswept, and wild. It felt clean. On my first night there, I lit a fire in the massive stone hearth. The sound of the ocean crashing against the rocks below was a steady, rhythmic drumbeat. I had one last thing to do. I went to the trunk of my car and pulled out a garment bag. Inside was my wedding dress. It was a Vera Wang custom gown, layers of silk organza and French lace. I remembered the day I bought it. I remembered how I felt when I walked down the aisle, thinking I was the luckiest woman in the world. I dragged the dress into the living room. I did not look at it with nostalgia. I looked at it as a shroud. I opened the glass door of the fireplace. The flames were hungry, licking at the air. I shoved the hem of the dress into the fire. Silk burns quickly. The fabric caught instantly, curling and blackening as the flames raced up the delicate lace. I watched the bodice turn to ash. I watched the veil disintegrate. The smoke was thick and smelled of burnt dreams, but to me, it smelled like purification. I stood there until the last ember faded, feeling a physical weight lift from my shoulders. The ghost of Mrs. Derek Sterling was gone. Only Kennedy Vallon remained. The next morning, the mail arrived. My lawyer had forwarded a letter from the Federal Detention Center. The envelope was stamped, "Inmate Mail." The handwriting was jagged, desperate. I sat on my deck, the sea breeze tangling my hair, and tore it open. "Kennedy, please, you have to help me. They put me in general population. I told you about the debts. These people are everywhere. I am scared. Kennedy, I am so scared. I can help you. I know things. I know about a larger laundering network. I can give you names. I can be an asset to Vanguard. Please, just talk to the prosecutor. Get me moved to protective custody. Get me a reduced sentence. I am sorry. I know I messed up, but I loved you. In my own way. I loved you. Please do not let me die in here. Derek, I read the letter twice. In my own way. I loved you. What a fascinating definition of love. Love that steals, love that lies, love that plans a murder in Aspen. I picked up my phone and called Agent Miller. "Ms. Vallon," he answered. "Everything okay?" "I received a letter from the inmate," I said, my voice flat. "He claims to have information about a laundering network." "We know," Miller sighed. "He has been trying to trade that intel for a plea deal all week. The problem is, his intel is garbage. We already rolled up that network 6 months ago. He has nothing to trade." "I see," I said. "Do you want to respond?" Miller asked. "Or do you want us to block further correspondence?" I looked at the ocean. I watched a hawk circling high above the water. Hunting. No response, I said. And Agent Miller. Please make sure the correspondence block is permanent. I do not want to hear his name again. Understood, Miller said. And Ms. Vallon, for what it is worth, you handled this better than anyone I have ever seen. Thank you. Agent Miller. I hung up. I tore the letter into small pieces and tossed them over the railing of the deck. The wind caught them, scattering the white confetti into the churning gray water below. As for Elara, her fate was less dramatic but equally absolute. My aunt and uncle, her parents' siblings, had been horrified by the live stream. The Vallon family was old money, and old money values discretion above all else. Elara had not just committed a crime, she had embarrassed the bloodline. They formally disowned her. No lawyers, no trust fund defense. She was left with a public defender, a man who looked overworked and underpaid. The evidence against her was overwhelming. The video confession, the bracelet recording, the digital footprint. She pled guilty to wire fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit murder in exchange for avoiding a life sentence. The judge gave her 20 years. She would be 44 when she got out. Her youth, her beauty, her potential all squandered because she wanted a shortcut. I did not go to her sentencing. I sent a representative from my legal team to ensure the paperwork was filed correctly. I had no interest in seeing her cry. Her tears were water, and I had built a dam. I walked back into my new house. It was empty, but it was not lonely. It was full of potential. It was full of silence that I controlled. I went to my new office, a room with a view of the horizon. I sat at my desk and opened my laptop. The screen glowed with the logo of Vanguard Crisis Solutions. My inbox was full of requests from CEOs, politicians, and celebrities who wanted to know how to protect themselves from the people sleeping next to them. I cracked my knuckles and began to type. The cleanup was done. The foundation was poured. It was time to build something new, something bulletproof. Time is a funny thing. When you are trapped in a lie, a single hour can feel like a decade, stretching out into an agonizing infinity of suspicion and fear. But when you are free, when you are truly, undeniably free, time moves like light. It has been exactly 1 year since the gala, 1 year since the glass wall came down, 1 year since I stood on a stage and burned my past to the ground so I could build something better from the ashes. I sat in my new office, a space that felt nothing like the obsidian fortress of the penthouse or the clinical precision of the old Vanguard headquarters. This office was in San Francisco, perched high above the bay, with floor-to-ceiling windows that actually opened to let the salt air in. There were no hidden cameras here, no soundproof pods, just sunlight, light oak furniture, and the hum of a company that was changing the world. On the coffee table in front of me sat the latest issue of Forbes magazine. The cover featured a woman in a white power suit, her arms crossed, looking at the camera with a gaze that was both welcoming and warning. The headline read in bold, gold letters, "The Crisis Queen: How Kennedy Vallon Turned Betrayal into a $1 billion Shield." I looked at the photo. I looked different. The tension that had lived in my jaw for 7 years was gone. The shadows under my eyes, which I used to hide with expensive concealer, had vanished. I looked like a woman who slept soundly because she knew exactly who was in her house and exactly where her money was. Vanguard was still thriving. Of course, corporations will always have dirty laundry, and I will always be the best at cleaning it. But my passion, my real work, was the new division I had launched 6 months ago. We called it Truth Keeper. It started as an idea during those long nights in Big Sur. Watching the ocean, I realized that what happened to me was extreme, but the elements of it, the financial secrecy, the digital gaslighting, the hidden assets were happening to women everywhere. They were happening to the teacher whose husband claimed he could not afford a vacation while hiding a gambling debt. They were happening to the stay-at-home mother whose name was on tax returns for businesses she did not know existed. Truthkeeper was an app, but it was really a weapon. It used the same forensic algorithms I had used to trap Derek, simplified for personal use. It scanned shared accounts for microtransactions that signaled hidden wallets. It cross-referenced location data with credit card usage to detect anomalies. It was an early warning system for financial infidelity. In 6 months, we had 2 million downloads. We had saved thousands of marriages by forcing honesty. And we had ended thousands of others by revealing treachery. Every day. My inbox was filled with letters from women who had found their voices because I had given them the data to back up their intuition. They were my army, and I was their general. My personal phone buzzed on the desk. I picked it up, expecting a notification from my CTO about our quarterly earnings. Instead, it was a text message. The name on the screen was Liam. Liam was an architect I had met 3 months ago. He was 35. With messy hair and hands that were always covered in graphite or chalk. He designed libraries and public park spaces meant to be shared, meant to be open. He drove a beat-up truck, not because he was hiding money, but because he liked old trucks. He had no crypto wallet. I knew this because on our first date, I told him exactly who I was and what I did. I told him I would run a background check on him that went back to kindergarten. He had laughed, handed me his driver's license and his social security card, and said, "Be my guest. Just do not judge me for the parking ticket I got in 2012. I liked Liam. He was simple in the most complex way. He was honest. I opened the message. Dinner tonight. I found a little spot in the mission that serves the best tacos. And I promise, no phone. It stays in the truck. I stared at the screen. No phone. A year ago. Those words would have triggered a panic attack. A year ago, a partner leaving a phone behind meant secrets. It meant a second device hidden in a jacket pocket. It meant deception. But today, it just meant he wanted to be with me. It meant he valued my attention more than his notifications. I felt a smile tug at the corners of my lips. It was a soft smile, one that felt native to my face now. I typed back, 7 o'clock, and bring the phone. I trust you enough to ignore it. I set the phone down. Trust. It was a heavy word. I used to think trust was a feeling, a blind leap of faith you took because you loved someone. I was wrong. Trust is not a feeling. Trust is a verified state of being. It is the result of consistency over time. I could trust Liam because I had verified him. Yes, but also because I now trusted myself. I trusted that if he ever lied to me, I would see it, I would know it, and I would handle it. I stood up and walked over to the large painting on the far wall. It was a generic abstract piece, soothing blues and grays. I pressed my hand against the frame, and it swung open on hidden hinges. Behind it was a small wall safe. I keyed in the code, 7734. The numbers that used to be the code for my trust fund, the numbers Derek had tried to steal, now they were just numbers. The safe door clicked open. Inside, there was no money. There were no jewels. There was only one object, resting on a velvet cushion like a museum artifact. It was a black smartphone, the corporate vault, Derek's second phone, the device that had shattered my life and then helped me rebuild it. I reached in and picked it up. It was cold and dead. The battery had drained months ago. I never charged it. I never turned it on. I did not need to know what was on it anymore. The messages to Elara, the gambling apps, the plans for my murder, they were all just digital ghosts trapped in a dead circuit board. I kept it not because I missed him, but because I needed to remember. I needed to remember that the smartest man in the room can still be outwitted. I needed to remember that the person closest to you can be a stranger. And most importantly, I needed to remember the moment I saw Elara's name light up on that screen. That was the moment Kennedy the victim died, and Kennedy the architect was born. It was my war medal. I held it for a moment, feeling its weight. Then I placed it back on the cushion and closed the safe. Click. I walked to the window and looked out at the Golden Gate Bridge, its red towers cutting through the fog. The city was alive, pulsing with energy. Somewhere out there, Derek was sitting in a cell, wearing a jumpsuit that did not fit, eating food that had no taste, living a life regulated by bells and guards. Somewhere out there, Elara was aging in a concrete box, wondering where her youth went. And here I was, standing in the sun, I turned away from the window and looked directly at the security camera mounted in the corner of my office. I knew the feed was being recorded. I knew that someday, someone might watch this. I walked up to the camera, looking straight into the lens, breaking the barrier between my story and your reality. Do not ever let anyone tell you that you are paranoid, I said, my voice firm and unwavering. Do not let them call you crazy. Do not let them tell you that you are imagining things. If your stomach drops when he walks in the room, pay attention. If the story does not add up, do the math. If you feel like something is wrong, it is because something is wrong. I leaned in closer. Your intuition is not a weakness. It is your survival instinct. It is the most sophisticated data processing system on the planet, honed by thousands of years of evolution. Listen to it, trust it, verify it. Because in a world full of passwords and encryption, a woman's gut feeling is the only data that never lies. I winked at the camera. Then I grabbed my purse and my keys. I walked out of the office, the heels of my shoes clicking a rhythm of victory on the hardwood floor. I took the elevator down to the garage. My car was waiting. It was a vintage Jaguar E-Type, convertible, painted a deep, British racing green. It was impractical. It was loud. It was fast. It was exactly the kind of car Derek would have hated because it drew too much attention. I threw my bag in the passenger seat and slid behind the wheel. The leather was warm from the sun. I turned the key, and the engine roared to life. A guttural, throaty growl that echoed off the concrete walls. I put on my sunglasses. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. I saw a woman who had walked through fire and came out made of gold. I shifted into gear and drove out of the garage, squinting as I hit the bright afternoon sunlight. I turned onto the highway, heading north, toward the coast, toward tacos with a man who had messy hair, toward a future that was unwritten and entirely mine. The wind whipped my hair around my face. I pressed down on the accelerator. The car surged forward, eating up the pavement. I was not running away from anything anymore. I was racing toward everything. I was Kennedy Vallon, and I was finally, beautifully, dangerously free. Thank you so much for listening to my story of betrayal and ultimate justice. If this tale kept you on the edge of your seat, please let me know where you are tuning in from in the comments below. I would love to connect with you and hear your thoughts on Derek and Elara's downfall. Please consider subscribing to the Family Revenge Stories channel, hitting that like button, and smashing the hype button to help this story reach more people who might need to hear that the truth always wins. Goodbye for now, and remember, always stay vigilant.